In recent weeks, Moldova has accused Russia of trying to destabilise it politically. There have been warnings of potential conflict, and there were even reports of a Russian missile flying through Moldovan airspace. What exactly is going on in Transnistria, and is it all linked to the conflict in Ukraine? Welcome to Roundtable. I'm Philip Hampshire. The political situation around Moldova is never easy, but recently the rhetoric has been escalating. Moldova has accused Russia of stoking recent anti-government protests, saying Moscow is plotting to overthrow the authorities. Russia, for its part, has accused Kyiv of planning a so-called false flag operation against its troops that are stationed in Moldova's breakaway region of Transnistria, which also lies along Ukraine's border. Some suggest Moscow is using that as a distraction for Ukrainian troops. So what does the immediate future hold for the small country lying on a big political pressure point? Joining us on the show to discuss this in the studio, I have Matveeva, who's a visiting senior research fellow at the Russia Institute, King's College London. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., we have Alejandro Sanchez, who's president of Second Floor Strategies and an Eastern Europe military analyst, who's written extensively about Transnistria and Moldova. And finally, in Istanbul, Lucia Scripcari, who's an analyst who monitors Moldovan domestic and foreign policy affairs. Anna, I'm going to come to you for with the first question, but first of all, just for the viewers at home, Moldova, let's talk about where it is. It's over in Eastern Europe, bordered by Ukraine on one side, and on the other side we have Romania. Transnistria is a separatist region, a narrow strip of land between the Dnistro River and the Ukrainian border. It broke away from Moldova in 1990. Russia's maintained a military presence in the region since 1992, so there are actually Russian soldiers in Transnistria as we talk, and it supports Transnistria economically through free natural gas and has provided Russian passports to some citizens. So, Anna, why on earth is there this relatively narrow strip of land, Transnistria, which sort of seems to be under no overall control, as it were?
I would take an issue that there is no overall control because this is a special region, but it is a region of Moldova. Overwhelmingly population living there has Moldovan passports. Some of them have Russian or Ukrainian passports, but they go to the rest of Moldova regularly. There are robust economic ties. Transnistria exports a lot of its industrial products to the European Union. 71% of its exports go to the EU with a Made in Moldova stamp. People go back and forth. Some students go to universities in both sides of the banks of Dnistro River. So yes, political elites know each other quite well. Sometimes they seem to have a pretty peaceful relationship, and the issue did look like on its way to resolution. Sometimes they go into a political conundrum and tensions arise, as we are seeing now. But generally, I would say it's a political issue. It's not an armed conflict. It's not a military confrontation. There are really quite congenial relations between people on both sides, lots of them having families on both sides. So in that sense, seeing it as kind of confronting each other militarily would be really exaggerating it vastly. How the whole issue came about? Because in 1992, there were voices and some quite vocal politicians in Moldova, in the capital, Chisinau, who took up the idea of joining Romania. And Constitution of Moldova actually allows that to happen. Whether that reflects political realities, whether there is real support in Moldova for actually losing independence and being swallowed by much greater Romania, there are different opinions. On that, I personally do not believe that the option of joining Romania is really on the table, but the fear of it is there. And that's why Transnistria rebelled against that. Then things started to gain momentum, passions were rising, weapons were there, but in the end it was a 5 days conflict, and after that quite a lot of cooperation patterns have been settling in.
Wilda, if I can come across to you. Yes, the Transnistria situation's been going on since 1990, and it's been relatively peaceful up until now. But there's plenty of Ukrainians who would say that a decade ago it was fairly peaceful over in East Ukraine. So what do you make of the situation in Transnistria at the moment?
I believe that there is a lot of that Transnistria has been politicized. It is a way for this region is a way for Russia to maintain control and influence over Moldova, to prevent Moldova from becoming an EU member, which is now Moldova is applying for for membership. It's a way for Moldova. It's a way that it's a tool that Russia utilizes to prevent Moldova from becoming too Western friendly. But let's be clear, it's not just Transnistria that is a tool that is utilized by the Russian government. Moldovan politics is also very politicized. Every other year we have a government, a parliament or a president that is either pro-Russia or pro-West. Right now, President Maya Sandu is very openly pro-West. Her predecessor, President Igor Dodon, was openly pro-Russian. So it's not just that Transnistria is a problem that prevents Moldova from becoming a more developed state, a more pro-Western state. Even Moldovan politics are heavily fractionalized and have been so since the independence, and that prevents the country from really moving forward.
Lucia, I saw you nodding there. Nonetheless, with all of this going on, while the row between Moldova and Transnistria as to exactly what the nature of the relationship between the two sides is, Russia last week only was saying the Moldovans are getting ready to invade. This is looking really aggressive. We need to go in there and we need to help our fellow compatriots in Transnistria. Is Moldova potentially another Eastern Ukraine, or is it being overblown a little bit at the moment?
Well, I have to start by saying that the war in Ukraine has first and foremost exposed Moldovan vulnerabilities that have existed before the war. So one of these vulnerabilities, of course, the conflict in Transnistria. Another one, as my colleague mentioned, the political divisions in the country between the pro-Russian and pro-Romanian people, the Russian influence over the minorities in Moldova, and another one is Moldovan dependency on Russian gas. So these 4 vulnerabilities have been exposed after the war, and the conflict in Transnistria have existed even before the war. So there have been formats through which Moldova and Transnistria tried to find and still is trying to find a resolution and provide a formal status to Transnistria. These formats have been known as 5+2 discussions formats involving EU member states as observers, Russia and Ukraine as also mediators in the Transnistrian conflict. But now the members face an existential crisis because these observers who are Russia and Ukraine are now at war. So a peaceful resolution is not visible, at the moment. And this is the moment that Moldova has to exploit to find a resolution on the status of Transnistria, especially that now EU is more involved in the Transnistria region. As my colleagues mentioned, the trade has been developed very in a very efficient form from Transnistria to EU. So now EU is more integrated in Transnistria, and Transnistria is more integrated within EU. So this is the time that Chisinau, the government in Chisinau, has to consider to foster discussions on the status of Transnistria, so that it is no longer a frozen conflict, but something that has to be resolved in order for Moldova to enter into the European Union.
Wilders, do you think that this is something that has to be resolved right now? The European Union has, if you like, ignored it more or less for slightly more than 30 years. So does it really need to get involved in dealing with Transnistria right now, or should it just focus on Ukraine?
Well, the European Union has been involved in the Moldova-Transnistria frozen conflict for the past 30 years. The EU is a member of the 5+2 organization that's trying to solve this conflict. The problem is that neither the EU nor the OSCE have really been actively involved. If you look at the history of the 5+2 system, it's really Russia, the actor that's putting forward ideas and proposals. The Cossack Memorandum from, I think, 2003, proposals that Moldova can become a federation, so that Transnistria could have essentially a veto power over Moldova's future foreign policy and defense policies. The EU, the OSCE have historically taken a backseat in this conflict, but now, not just because of the war, but because also of NATO, of EU expansion, now that they accepted Romania as a member to both the EU and to NATO. Now Moldova borders the EU, and now with the war, the EU cannot simply forget about this conflict. Has to really try to become a more active participant. And right now is the time to do it. One, because you have a West Europe-friendly president and parliament, like President Sandu and her PAS party, but also because right now, with Russia so focused on Ukraine, with its economy being crippled because of the sanctions, this is the time for Brussels to approach the separatist Transnistrian government, to call it like that, and say, hey, now let's talk. What can we do for you to become friendlier towards Chisinau, to become less Moscow friendly, to put it in very simple terms? So this is the perfect time for the EU to become more involved.
Anna, we were hearing from Lucia a few moments ago that she sees Transnistria as being a weakness for Moldova, potentially a vulnerability, possibly even a weakness or a vulnerability for the European Union. Is it not also, though, a vulnerability for Russia? Because it's a long way from Russia and they can't actually get a land bridge out to it or link out to it if there are issues there.
Absolutely, because first, Russia never recognized Transnistria's declaration of sovereignty, it never recognized it as an independent state, or never done any of these political moves which Russia has done in relation to Abkhazia, South Ossetia, or now currently Donbass. So in that sense, Russia always said, well, you have to sort out it with Chisinau. Yes, Russia had the power of initiative. They have produced various designs on how it could be settled on this or that conditions, but all these proposals have been rejected by Chisinau. That's also true. European Union has been heavily involved. They had special representative, a very active diplomacy in the early 2000s, border monitoring mission, because there were lots of reports that there is widespread smuggling. What they came out that yes, there was smuggling, and the smuggling was to do with chicken legs. And business people from both banks of Dnistro River have been quite involved in this scheme, which also involved the port of Odessa. So European Union did put a lot of money also in reforming Moldova, but it still remains the poorest country in Europe, yeah, as we speak. So a lot there. With Russia in Transnistria now, it has unverified number of troops there. There are some analysts who say that there are 1,500 of them. Some reports say that there are actually fewer of them, but most of these people are local. These people are from Transnistria themselves. Maybe about 50 plus of them actually came from Russia. Moldova, government of Moldova does not allow transfer of troops and weapons through its territory to Transnistria. Ukraine closed its border to that kind of non-food items, especially military, since 2015. So
it's almost a castle under siege then.
Yeah,
they can export stuff, but they can't pull it in.
Yes, but well, they can bring civilian produce, and they do continue bringing in gas. But in terms of military, they are in besieged circumstances. So the best option for them would be to sit tight and smile beautifully. And also remember that they simultaneously with having Russian citizenship, most of them also have Moldovan citizenship, and some of them do have Ukrainian citizenship.
Well, let's pull up there. You mentioned that that it's the poorest country in Europe. In fact, according to the CIA World Factbook, 16,483 is the GDP per capita and purchasing power parity. If we compare that with Belarus, even Belarus, which is generally regarded as a relatively poor country, that's $21,709. So this really is quite a poor country. Lucia, is the reason why Moldova's been left behind by the growth of so much of the rest of Europe primarily down to this sort of ethnic friction and tension within the country between the ethnic Romanians and the ethnic Russians?
Well, exactly. The population is very divided, and Russia has leverage over it because you also have the Russian media present in the Moldovan media. So it also using this as a soft power to, spread actually fake news and disinformation among the population. So people are disinformed, and of course the first condition on getting into EU is to solve the territorial disputes. And the Transnistrian conflict is a territorial dispute that has prevented Moldova to join the EU. And this is now, that's the reason why there have been, formats like 5+2 with the EU involved on the table of discussions. And presently the EU takes a role of observer, but it has to be a mediator because in the South Ossetia and Abkhazia conflicts, it takes the role as a mediator. So it should be more assertive nowadays, and Moldovan government should also make use of the experts and diplomats, EU diplomats being more involved in these discussions, because what we have seen before now is that Russia has come with several proposals like Cossack Memorandum, which would also propose a federal state, Moldova being a federal state and Transnistria being a federal unit. And a federal unit means a power of veto in the parliament. So obviously, as my colleague mentioned, this would be used as a tool to control Moldovan foreign policy. That's one of the reasons why basically Moldova could not join the EU before now. But since it has now a candidacy status, as I mentioned, the EU can be more assertive and more involved in the negotiations with Transnistria.
Right, well, we've got some quotes here. The first one that I've got is from Maia Sandu, who is the current president of Moldova, and she says, and I quote, "The Kremlin's attempts to bring violence to Moldova will not work. Our main goal is security of citizens and the state. Our goal is peace and public order in the country." Meanwhile, Julian Groza, who is Moldova's former deputy foreign minister and the executive director of the Institute for European Policies and Reforms in Moldova, has this to say. He says, "It's clear that these threats from Russia and the appetite to escalate the war towards us are very high. Moldova is the most affected country after Ukraine by the war. We are still a small country which still has an underdeveloped economy, and that creates a lot of pressure." Wilders, they sound like they're quite worried the situation is more serious than it appears to be. Or is that simply political grandstanding within Moldova?
I don't think it's political grandstanding, but I'm going to push back very quickly to something that you asked earlier, when you talked about Transnistria and how it's a problem for Moldova's development. Yes, Transnistria is a problem, but it's not the only problem. One of the reasons why Moldova has not been able to develop more than we would like it to develop was, for example, bad governance, corruption. It was just I think a decade ago in 2014, 2015, the Moldovan government at the time stole $1 billion from the national budget. So it's not just that if the Transnistria Moldova problem were somehow solved tomorrow, that Moldova will be shaped to join the EU. Much more needs to happen domestically. Now, justice sector reform is a topic that President Sanchez has been working on, that she unfortunately hasn't delivered, but she's definitely trying to fix it. So much more needs to be done for Moldova to become as developed and to become as secure as we want it to be. Going back to your question about the issue of Russia being a threat, I certainly do believe that Russia wants Moldova to come back to its sphere of influence, as it has been under previous presidents like President Dodon, who was not, like I said, President Sandu's predecessor. If the war had gone differently, if Russia had been able to take Kiev and really destabilize Ukraine as it wanted to 1 year ago, I would have said, yeah, maybe Moldova was the next military target. Since that's not going to happen because of what's happening in Ukraine, I do believe that Russia really wants to bring back Moldova back to its sphere of influence. And what they're trying to do now, according to the Moldovan government, is that they're trying to somehow destabilize the country. What we have to remember is that there are really only three political parties right now in Moldova: the Sandu's PAS party, the bloc of the Communist Socialists, the bloc of the Communists and Socialists, which are obviously pro-Moscow, and the Shore Party, which is also pro-Moscow. These are two parties that are organizing protests every day. We know that they are paying protesters to go protest against the Sandu government. That's a way for them to try to destabilize the country. Also, the Moldovan government is accusing not just Russians, but Serbians, for example, for trying to go into the country to organize protests. I believe it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a match between FC Sheriff and FK Partizan from Belgrade. Serbian nationals were prohibited from going into Moldova to watch the match because the Moldovan government said that, these are far-right individuals who are going to promote protests if they enter the country. So I do believe that the Moldovan government takes this threat seriously. And let's be honest, these strategies have worked before by the Russian government. And it's something that is a valid threat. It's a valid concern for sure.
Lucia, how do you feel about it? Do you think it's a valid concern or not?
So these affirmations actually come from the latest events that happened in Moldova, and I'm talking about the local protests, which are orchestrated actually by the political parties which are supported by Russia. And now Moldovan government is asking the EU to impose sanctions on the oligarch who is the head of this party, Socialist Party, and pro-Russian parties, because they are using Russian funds to orchestrate these protests. So Moldovan government feels like the threat is also to its internal politics, because these protests are aimed to topple the government, and they're using the high inflation rate, the economic instability as a tool to suppress and criticize the government for its failures to face the economic challenges. But this is actually orchestrated. So Moldova is open about it, and it calls for measures to be taken against those who orchestrate. Therefore, there is a threat to its political stability. That's why not only the Transnistrian conflict, but also the Russian presence, as I said, within the media, which is spreading fake news, is also a threat. Therefore, the government is open about it, and calls, for example, for the EU, and the US has already imposed sanctions on those oligarchs. But because Russia lost its predecessor, who was Igor Dodon, he was a pro-Russian a political leader. So his defeat has been actually a defeat for Russia, because it had an ally. Now it doesn't have. Now it faces a pro-Western government in a country which has been within its sphere of influence. So losing its sphere of influence has an impact, against its foreign policy as well.
Lucia, Vilnius, and Matveeva, thank you very much, all three of you, for joining me. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate if you head on over to our YouTube channel. Just head there and search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me here and all of the team, thank you for watching and goodbye.